Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over signs a woman is emotionally unstable. And I don't particularly mean borderline personality. I just mean more specifically what sometimes we clinically call emotionally dysregulated. This is not an insult. I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm just making this video for educational purposes. So I hope that's clear. I wanted to go ahead and jump in, and all of the research is going to be in the description box, okay? And I know a lot of it's not accessible or some of it's not, but I'm going to summarize and talk about what's in the research so that you guys still have some access to it, okay? So the very first one that I feel is a sign that a woman might be emotionally unstable or dysregulated is she actually takes the ability of taking accountability as some sort of offense if she needs to take accountability, or she might get very angry, reactive, or in a lot of denial, to which she might completely brush off what you're saying or deflect the blame onto you or something else. Now, the reason why this can be perceived as someone that is emotionally unstable is because often why an individual does this is because taking accountability does create a sense of an emotion, whatever that emotion may be. Sometimes it's guilt. Often it is, right? Any sort of emotion. They might feel shame. They might feel bad for hurting you, whatever it may be. And often what we see is individuals who are able to be emotionally stable or regulate themselves, they're able to take different forms of emotion and cope with it and readjust and realign themselves to better fit whatever new information they have received based on their emotions. When a person is unable to regulate their emotions, they often find ways to divert themselves away from that emotion or reject that emotion entirely. And so this is why you see these types of behaviors such as being offended, which is basically saying, I can't handle this emotion, take it away from me. They get angry. They might say, why are you making me feel this way? Let me put it on to you. That can also be projecting or just deflecting away from it. Any sort of reactivity, I can't handle this emotion, or in denial. That emotion is too strong. I'm hoping it's not real. Let me just pretend it's not real to some extent, right? This is all subconscious. And so you're seeing these behaviors when somebody is emotionally unstable. The next one is any sort of struggle with impulse control, impulsivity, okay? Now, this research was done in 2023, and what we found is any individual with any sort of unstable affect or emotional dysregulation, what we found is it's actually associated with impulsive behaviors, risk taking, and some severe cases and things like that that I can't say on YouTube, but you can look at the research if it's accessible. This is not a research that was done in the United States. As far as I'm aware, it was done, I think, in the UK, which I prefer research that's done in the United States because that's where I am, because I think there are some cultural variations. However, I still think overall we can see that this is something that can be translated. That research is pretty interesting, but there is a little bit of it can be a bit heavy for some people, so just keep that in mind. But basically what we find is that emotional dysregulation can actually create these maladaptive coping strategies to which we see that lack of impulse control. So I'm going to give you some examples of that are a little like not as threatening. Could be like a lot of spending habits. This is really common. That is not necessarily a completely frightening type of result where she might be buying a lot of things. I see it a lot where it's like they'll buy like multiple Amazon packages and it's unopened, but the buying or the concept of it is what gives them that stability, maladaptive stability, right? They're coping with buying something or that immediate feeling of receiving something brand new and that they can receive this, or somewhere subconsciously they have control over certain assets such as financial means or any sort of connection to the object of their affection, whether not necessarily a person, but if they feel like they want to improve their looks, they might buy a lot of things in that regard. And so you'll start seeing these types of behaviors. However, it usually is attached to their emotions. So if they're feeling more emotionally dysregulated, you might see these behaviors increase spending. Sometimes it might be texting multiple people just to get a lot of attention. You might see these things. And so that's something to keep in mind. The next one can be a bit tricky to spot originally, but you can start seeing it in their past relationships or in their behavior with you if you're a man. And if you are a woman, you might start paying attention that this is a pattern you've had in your life, friendships and romantic relationships. But we actually see a lot of individuals with kind of an unstable and kind of like interpersonal instability is a better way to put it. And it's usually due to a fear of abandonment, but we don't need to get too deep into that. But that's really often what the cause of this is. So basically, what we saw in this research, 2013, is generally people with emotional instability, often what we characterize as emotional instability, right? We might see this as unstable or intense interpersonal relationships to which the cause of this intensity or instability is that strong fear of abandonment. And this is common with individuals with borderline, but like I said, I'm not specifically talking about borderline. If you want a video more particular about borderline, like just specifically, I can make a video specifically on that criteria because this is not the criteria necessarily of borderline. That one's more detailed. However, you can see this with people with borderline. You can see this with people with any sort of attachment issues. You can just see this with people who are generally unstable. And that's kind of what this is. However, typically with borderline, you might see kind of like they might alternate between idealizing and then devaluing. That's kind of more characteristic of borderline. But anyways, you might see these kind of unstable relationships. And you might also see where this particular lady, for example, she might talk about her exes and they're very like intense, severe cases where maybe it was like a lot of violence, volatility, and she stayed with him. Or maybe he had some sort of use issues to which she still stayed, or maybe he controlled her or whatever it is. And you might sometimes see in her narrative that she's quite the victim, which could be her perception. Not necessarily it's true or untrue, but we might see this in two categories. Either she intensifies her own perspective, so she's lacking some sort of self-awareness, or she stays with people who mistreat her, which shows a sign of abandonment. And usually it's because she's holding on to whatever she can, and that creates a sense of her being dysregulated, meaning she's comfortable with the state of being dysregulated. Now, people who are emotionally stable, typically, if they're in a situation that creates some sort of sense of instability to which their particular coping skills cannot actually leverage to a heightened sense of stability, often they don't want to compromise that. And so what happens is they step away from those types of relationships. If a person does not do that, it usually means their general state of mind, not all the time, okay? I'm not saying this is for everybody, but it means their general state of mind might be overall unstable, to which they can't see that difference or that reflection in comparison to someone who is a bit more stable. I'm sorry if that was a little bit of a mouthful. I hope that made sense. I try to talk clear with you guys, but sometimes I know I lose it. I get off in a tangent. I apologize for that. The next one is typically you'll see that she may hold on to things and let it fester instead of directly communicating with you, okay? This research was done in 2016, and we can kind of see that emotional stability is often correlated with some sort of behaviors of where we see more direct communication in particular women. And so if she's indirectly communicating, often why she's doing that is she might try and get you to get a hint out of it, and she's not directly telling you. Now, the reason why this is a little bit unstable is because, and I'll tell you more in the next point, her self-esteem might not be so strong, to which she's afraid if she says, I didn't appreciate that you did X, Y, and Z, that maybe you'll reject her, you'll hurt her, make fun of her, whatever her perspective is. And so instead of directly communicating that, she avoids her fear and she indirectly communicates, to which she doesn't have to take full responsibility for what she's communicating, but she can subconsciously say, I did say this a little bit, so how come you didn't understand, right? And that's not healthy. In general, that's not a healthy behavior at all, but also a sign of emotional instability, because you're seeing different emotions fluctuate depending on her mood, but also her lack of communication, if that makes sense. Now, I mentioned that the last point we would touch on is that self-esteem. Now, often we see some sort of self-esteem fluctuations. Now, it's actually not self-esteem fluctuations. It is actually typically a sign of low self-esteem, but it looks like fluctuating self-esteem because she's overcompensating in some extent. Now, I'll explain that, okay? Some days she might feel like she's very attractive and she might overinflate that. She might, talk about it a lot. She may be thinking she's very attractive. She may be fishing for compliments, whatever it may be. Maybe her friends are hyping her up, whatever it may be. And she might say that she's very attractive or she's looking very attractive, which is good. However, it's actually very fragile, really, inside her, right, emotionally. And what's actually happening is she's overcompensating for that lack of feeling low. And you'll see where some other days you might see her very low comparing to other people. She might even react very poorly in terms of jealousy. And so you'll see those self-esteem cues and markers actually fluctuate, to which overall you start seeing her component of herself. Her self-esteem is actually not very foundational. It is very fluctuating. And this is typically a sign of emotional instability, not all the time. But the reason this is because her mood actually might be attached to how she's displaying her self-esteem, which is why you're seeing that fluctuation. I hope that makes sense. Again, research is in the description box. Oh, and this last one, the research was 2014. Forgot to say that. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.